Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Tonight, we're going to focus on technology, and I want to introduce you to two gentlemen, Bern Grush and Jerry Boyer. They're the co-founders of a Canadian company called Harmonize Mobility. They focus on solutions that connect new transportation technologies to public policy. Gentlemen, how are you? Welcome to my show.
Fine. We're doing very well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's great to be here.
So tell me a little bit about Harmonize Mobility. What is Harmonize Mobility? Maybe Bern, you could start.
Well, we are a team that focuses specifically on how do we take all the new technologies, so many new technologies about mobility, whether they're digital or whether they're these new ride hailing or scooters and all these different technologies. How can we make them work from a policy perspective, or how can we make them work for in a social perspective as opposed to a business perspective? So everything that we do is targeted toward those kinds of things. And how do we get ready for autonomous vehicles? How do we get ready for sidewalk robots, which we talked about a few months ago? So all those kinds of things.
Jerry, you spent a couple of decades in the pharmaceutical business, and then you were a chief innovation officer. How did you get involved in mobility?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Brian. So, Bern and I met, I guess, about 7 or 8 years ago. And so we both have technology backgrounds and we both care about society, we care about people. And so we were just randomly chatting at a unrelated meeting, and we realized that we needed to work together. Bern was working on his textbook at the time around transportation. My background is using technology to really bring value and to make a change. And so it doesn't really matter. Like, I'm not a research and development or a pharmaceutical manufacturing expert, but I use technology to deliver value in all those areas. So switching over to transportation, I mean, we all have to travel. As a user, I kind of get it. And so technology is kind of a straightforward thing for me.
Fantastic. And Bern, what do you want to achieve with Harmonize Mobility?
What I want to achieve, I think both of us want to achieve, we want to make a difference in the sense that we are concerned, many of us are concerned about the enormous impact that transportation of goods and people has on the environment. We hear over and over again that transportation contributes about a third to the global warming equation. And we think that can be reduced with a body of policies and a body of efficiencies and a body of technology, but only if it's coordinated. All this technology has to be coordinated with policy in order for it to have an impact. Otherwise, we're just going to have, we'll just have the same problem automated, or the same problem with electric vehicles. We'll just have the same problem of misuse and abuse of these systems if we don't coordinate policy with the technology. So that's what we're up to.
We're chatting tonight with Bern Grush and Jerry Boyer. They're the co-founders of a Canadian company called Harmonize Mobility. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Bern and Jerry in just a minute. We're going to learn a little bit about them, how they got involved and where they are today, where they're going, and we're going to learn some interesting fun facts, including that Jerry is actually part of a Beatles tribute band. Sounds interesting. Stay with us for a second. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. We're talking tonight about technology, primarily transportation technology and innovation, with Bern Grush and Jerry Boyer. They're the co-founders of a Canadian company called Harmonize Mobility. They focus on solutions that connect new transportation technologies to public policy. So far, they've worked on mobility as a service, autonomous vehicles, sidewalk robots, which Bern and I talked about a little bit about a month ago or so. And now they're onto something they call Rydell, which is pronounced Rydeal, not Rydell. I say Rydell because I was listening to Grease last night, and it's not Grease, it's Rydeal. And we're going to find out more about Rydeal in the next little while. But let me just find out a little bit more about these gentlemen, because they've got some fascinating backgrounds. Jerry Boyer is an innovator, entrepreneur, a musician, and an adventurer. He is the leading leader and founder of innovative organizations. As we mentioned, he's the co-founder of Harmonize Mobility, which is using technology to improve transportation. But he's also the co-founder of 1 Million Acts of Innovation. That'll be interesting. We'll have to ask you about that. He's the executive advisor to Better Lounge, North America's largest provider of massage chairs for events at workplace and home. And he's the co-founder of Jerry's Fun Club, an adventure travel group. He is the former CIO, which was chief innovator or
information
chief information officer for GSK Canada, 20 plus years of executive leadership experience with that global pharmaceutical company. And fun fact, he's a professional performing musician. He's the co-founder of the Liverpool Four, which is a Canada's tribute to the Beatles and the traveling Milburys. And he plays George Harrison. And finally, he's a coach, facilitator, and people lover. He provides coaching services to people who want to grow their leadership and rise through the corporate environment. Jerry, what a fascinating background. How did you get involved in all of this? Let's start with what is the 1 Million Acts of Innovation?
Yeah. So, wow, that was a lot of information that you just provided about me. So 1 Million Acts of Innovation is something that I co-founded, I guess, 7, 8, 9 years ago, really around using innovation to make a difference for people. And we do a lot of things in kind of all around the world to make a difference. So we've worked in Africa, we've worked locally. I could take the whole show on that one.
Oh, really? Well, we should maybe do another show on that sometime. And then tell me, how did you get involved in being part of a tribute band?
Apparently, I have a short attention span, but seriously, I've been a musician as long as I can remember. Put myself through school as a working musician, and then I kind of got out of the business because I didn't like the at the time the rooms were all full of smoke and drunken people. So I got out of that business and had a real career, as my mother really wanted me to have. And then they came in with some new rules saying that you couldn't smoke in public. So I went back into the business and started the Beatles tribute band because music is for me, it's fun, and it's about kind of having a just enjoyable time and not taking it too seriously. And, when you put on a wig and act in character, you can't take it too seriously, but we are an excellent tribute to that band.
Awesome. And when and where can we hear you perform?
So as a matter of fact, tonight I'm performing my first show in a year and a half indoors at a small club in Hamilton, Ontario, Stonewalls. And then I think in a couple of weeks, we're out at Chudley's Entertainment Farm. It's a large outdoor venue in north of Milton in Halton Hills. Outdoor, I think they hold a couple of thousand people, and we'll be performing 2 nights there as well.
When is that?
26th and 27th of August. Or you can visit the www.theliverpool4.com and see our schedule.
I'll have to catch you at Chudley's. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Awesome.
And what about the massage chairs?
Yeah, so my wife started a company, and she described it to me. She says, "I'm going to start a company, rent massage chairs," and I was like, "What?" And as a matter of fact, that little company has grown up to be North America's largest provider. So they provide chairs for workplaces, if a corporation wants to create a wellness lounge for their employees, and hospitals have been using them a lot over the last year in the pandemic. But she also provides rental chairs for events, short-term, long-term, and has a full retail capability as well.
Fantastic. And Bern Grush has also joined us, and Bern has an equally impressive background. He's got a master's in systems design engineer at the University of Waterloo, and he's got a cognitive and human factors psychology background. What the heck, Bern, is cognitive and human factors psychology?
That's actually the beginning of artificial intelligence. What that's about is how does the human mind work? How is it that we can read? How do we see? How do we hear? Those kinds of things. And then that's sort of like the physical underpinning of it. But then there's, or the biological underpinning of it. But then there's layers on top of that like how we make decisions and so on. If you probably have heard of an area called behavioral economics, that's kind of at the edge of that as well. And that plays into a lot of the work that we do now. So all those things about human behavior and about environments that work well for humans, that's what that human factors is all
Really?
about.
Well, again, maybe we should do a whole nother interview on that, because that's something that really interests me. I think behavior economics has not been, not nearly enough attention has been paid to that. And too often we are focused on classical economics rather than thinking about how humans actually behave. But you're now the Chief Innovation Officer at Harmonize Mobility. You describe yourself as an inventor, an entrepreneur, an author, a strategist for automated fleets, and the project leader for ground-based automated mobility. And you co-authored The End of Driving: Transportation Systems and Public Policy Planning for Autonomous Vehicles. So I got to ask you, Bern, are autonomous vehicles really coming?
Not the way they've been painted. Not this in the extreme, sort almost like the jetpack world, where you would where any without waiting very long, you would have any car take you anywhere, and very inexpensive. That world is a bit of a fantasy. They will be coming. They'll be coming in limited spaces. Where they're going to be coming before they come as taxis, they'll be used to move goods autonomously. There will be trains of trucks that have a single driver in the first truck, and then 3 or 4 other trucks following that truck. So in other words, one driver can move several trucks, for example. That will happen sooner, but also these ideas of these robots moving small parcels on the sidewalk or bicycle lanes, those will come sooner as well. So the answer is they're coming, but they're going to come a little different and a little slower than has been painted in the past decade.
So, we've heard a lot about autonomous vehicles, and you've just described that you think it's going to come, but it's going to come in a little different manner. And you've now formed this company, Rideal. Tell us, what is Rideal? What it's all about?
Well, that actually started out as from a paper I read about almost 4 or 5 years ago, and it's from the UITP, the International Transportation Institute in Europe, and they said autonomous vehicles are coming, and we have a problem because if everybody owns one, then we're just going to have worse congestion than before. Or if they all operate in a competitive commercial fashion, then we're going to have a problem that's going to defeat current transit systems. So what we need to do is we need to collaborate. In other words, we need to have a system. We need to have ways in which these autonomous vehicles can be biased toward bringing people to existing transit, for example. And that gave me the idea with my co-author, a fellow named John Niles, of the book that we were written. And we designed a system that would solve that problem that the UITP described. And it was just around that time that I met Jerry, and he said, well, that's going to be a long time before those be. And he was right. He was more right than we were. And why don't you just use this for today's systems, for today's Ubers and Lyfts and so forth? So what actually happened in the collaboration with Jerry is that we moved away from a purely autonomous world into a world of actually really helping the policy of all sorts of what it's called mobility as a service, all the kinds of commercial services that can move people, and how we can have that integrate with transit instead of compete with transit. And that's how that moved from the autonomous world to the world we're in now. And that's how we ended up with this product, Rideal, which directly addresses that policy problem. Let me put it in.
Well, that's fascinating. Bern, tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, the idea is that there's many, many commercial services, and it doesn't matter whether you're thinking about a bike share or taxis or vans. And there's many ways to move around besides public transportation. And the idea is, how can we use all of those existing commercial systems run by many companies whose goal is just to move passengers? How can we use those to more and more move people toward transportation nodes? Can we move them, for example? Can we have people leave their home and get to the train station instead of taking their car to the train station? Or can we have other people that would otherwise use their car for an entire trip, use a service to get sort of for example, to the train station, some other ideas are there's many employers who would be gladly help their employees to get to work, contribute to them getting to work, and so that is another. There's many employers that do that now. Some companies run their own bus systems for their employees, for example. But these are all
and lots of people have talked about how the last mile ends up being the critical issue that is uneconomic for a lot of city municipal bus companies because they have these meandering routes through suburbs. I was just explaining the other day that I found it incredibly efficient, productive, and cost effective to just take an Uber to the GO train station rather than drive. Which would mean that I'd be driving around the parking lot for 5 minutes looking for a spot, and I'd be walking for 7 minutes through the rain or the snow to the station. And it was an excellent way of getting to the GO train station, and versus taking the Uber all the way downtown, more efficient.
100% is absolutely correct. What we would like to do is to have very many more people stop driving, 2 or 3 kilometers to the train station, but have them actually use the train. There's cases where people get to the train station and they can't find a place to park, so they have to drive to the next train station or drive downtown.
Happens all the time.
Yeah. So what's been mostly happening now, there's many cities that well over 100 of them in North America that have programs, kind of one-on-one programs for example, for Uber or Lyft or a taxi company. Here in Toronto, there's one of our biggest taxi companies has a contract with the City of Toronto for seniors. For disabled seniors. So this is not an unusual idea where a public transit authority collaborates with a commercial company, a taxi, a ride hail, whatever, very common concept, but they're usually done on a one-on-one basis, which means that those people who are able to use that policy system, that ride, have only one choice. And what we do is we manage a whole fleet of such choices. First of all, the purpose is to provide a lot more choices for the rider, but it's also it also has the job equity or employment equity value of giving of having all this work be available to all of the ride hailers and all of the taxi operators, and more importantly, why not have bike share and scooters, and there's other new things, e-bikes and so forth that are coming out. Why not involve all of those? One of our favorite examples.
It's probably important to note here that the product ride deal is intended to be used by a transit agency. So this gives the transit agency the ability to define what they want to get done. So that first last mile or the late night ride home, whatever they want to get done. And it also allows them to define to these ride providers how they want to get that done. And it distributes the incentives or the subsidies to make sure that it's cost effective for the
So this is what, an add-on to the Go Transit app that not only gets me the ride downtown, but then tells me how I'm going to get from the Go train station to my house?
So it's not an app, okay? It is a back-end tool for the transit agency to use. But the app, using that example, the app would identify the different combinations of rides available and the different services. So if there was scooter available, bike share, ride hail, that would all be available in the app, and it would be driven by the back end ride deal. So this simplifies the transit agency's ability to manage all of those different contracts and terms and services. It just makes it dead simple for them.
It's interesting. I interviewed a critic of Metrolinx, I think a year ago, and he said that Metrolinx has been spending more money on structured parking garages than they have been on transit, because that's the biggest challenge they have is actually getting people to the GO train stations, such that they have to build these massive parking structures that you've seen at a bunch of different GO train stations. So, he argued, let's get the transit companies building transit again rather than investing in parking garages.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are working with various transit agencies. Lots of them are building parking lots, but even those parking lots, they're filling up by 6:30 in the morning. And so you know, this is a different way to get people to those train stations without having to drive and park. It's and Metrolinx, we have had conversations with them, and those conversations are ongoing as well.
Bern, how does this actually work?
So I just want to tell you one of the most exciting opportunities that we have, and it's a pilot that's being worked out in Barcelona, and that is there's more train stations in Barcelona than here, but when you get off the train station at a particular stop, it is about something on the order of 3 kilometers to get to a innovation campus. A few thousand people work there, and many of them take the car because of those last 3 kilometers. And what we're doing is working with a scooter company that's moving people from the train station just those last couple kilometers to the campus. And that's an example of a policy that reduces traffic all the way from all over the Barcelona, greater Barcelona area. It reduces a lot of vehicle traffic, and it makes a huge difference for. And that's just
3 kilometers on a scooter, Bern? Seriously?
Well, 3 kilometers on a scooter? That's not that far.
Okay.
It's probably less than 3. It's probably 2, but nonetheless, that's not that far.
That sounds fantastic.
My daughter uses a scooter about 2 kilometers every day, two ways.
So explain how this actually works. What are you talking about?
So what happens is we have something we call them subsidizers or incentivizers, and this could be a public authority, it could be like a Metrolinx or a TTC. It doesn't matter. It's a public authority that says we want to get seniors to medical, or we want to get people to the train station, whatever it is that we want to do. Or employers say, I want to get my employees to my work campus or my work building and without parking because I'm running out of parking space, for example. It just might be a financial issue of the non-affordability of adding more parking. And so whether it's a business or an employer, it doesn't matter. So somebody says, here's what I want to achieve. It could be a sports stadium says, I want to tack on an incentive for you to use the transit to get to the stadium because we're running out of parking. So the subsidizer puts in a budget and a set of rules. For example, the stadium says, well, we only provide rides on the nights in which there's a game. Or the train station says we only provide assistance to get to the train station from Monday to Friday between these certain hours. So there's hours and times and place, or a set of geographic and temporal rules, and all that's stored in the system, in our system. And then somebody asks for a ride. So now you have asked for a ride to get to the train station. And when you ask for the ride, you will say, yes, you have the choice of 4 ways to get to the train station, and you pick the one you want, and there's a $3 incentive for you. Pick whichever one you want. So in fact, you pick a bike share, and it's now free because it's only $3. Or you pick an $8 Uber, which is now only $5 because you have $3 towards. So we don't care what you choose, as long as it's a registered legal system. Your incentive goes toward the one you've chosen. Then you pick the one you pick, take your trip, and that's it.
And so the whole idea here is to have this incentive that increases the use of something for the last mile, which increases the transit company's use of their trains or subways or whatnot. Is that correct?
It reduce the use of the private vehicle, increase the use of transit. Now, if we're taking a senior to a medical, we still now have a vehicle taking the senior to medical, but we're not, but that's a special case. But getting you to the train station without your car, we'd love you to get to the train station without taking your car.
We already know that the Uber cars and the Lyft cars and the taxis, they're already out there. They're already picking people up. This is a way to leverage those assets, get them working, but get them working in a way that serves public transportation. And that's what Ride Deal does.
Fascinating. I think I've probably been a test case for you because I haven't been using Ride Deal, but I've effectively been doing what you're doing. I'm about, 3 kilometers, maybe 5 kilometers away from the GO train station. And Bern, I did exactly what you described. I used to drive to the GO train station, and inevitably I'd spend 5 minutes driving around the parking lot looking for a parking spot. Probably 20% of the time there wasn't a parking spot available, and I'd have to drive either to the next GO train station, and I would have missed the train, and so therefore, drive to the next GO train station and miss the train and miss my timing, or turn around and drive all the way downtown, which was usually what I ended up doing if I couldn't find a parking spot. And for numerous months of the year, I ended up walking, a couple of minutes in snow or rain from my car to the GO train station. And then I started, as I said, using Uber. And the beauty of it was that it dropped me off right at the station. So I didn't have to worry about, those two issues. What would have made it far better would have been if I could have guaranteed that the Uber would come in time. So I'd meet the train with like 2 minutes or 3 minutes to spare. And inevitably the Uber or some of the other rideshare would one day it would be 2 minutes away, the next day it would be 20 minutes away, and so I could never count on the Uber being available at the right time for me to get to the train. And then the other thing that really upset me was I'd have to guess when I'd be getting back on the return trip to the station. And so I live in Mississauga. I got off at the Clarkson GO train station. I found out that if I ordered the Uber after Lakeview, but before Port Credit, it would arrive at the right time. But if I waited to Port Credit, I'd often have to wait. And then, again, sometimes it was 2 minutes away and the guy would leave because he'd be upset and I'd get charged for a missed ride. And then other times I'd have to wait 10, 15 minutes in the station for it. So making it seamless and making it one charge would be spectacular. And then the other thing, obviously, we talked about this before, Bern, is I'd take the GO train downtown, pay one fare, and then I'd get on the TTC and pay another fare. And so having it all in one fare, having it seamless, having the timing work out, if you guys can solve that problem, I'm a customer.
Yeah.
We're working on it. And Bern, I think we need to get Brian as our spokesperson.
You're hired.
Sounds good. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Okay. The last two slides you didn't want me to use, correct?
Well, you can use that. Well, we thought it was too many for the audience, but I wanted you to know about them because I know of your role in Transit Alliance.
Yeah. Okay. So what have we not talked about? Do you want to talk about for the last 15?
Why don't we talk about some of the things that are going on in Europe?
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, it's not a Toronto issue, but it's the point is we're having an international impact right here from Toronto, so we're pretty proud of that.
Yeah, we can also, so we can talk about Europe. We can talk about some of the projects that we're working on. So we're, for example, we're involved with TransLink in Vancouver. We're looking at
okay. Hold it. So Jerry, I'm going to ask you about what projects you're working on, and then Jerry, I'm going to ask you, Bern, I'm going to ask you about Europe. Okay.
Beauty.
Perfect.
Okay, here we go. 15 seconds of silence, please. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking about autonomous vehicles and transportation and integrating the last mile use by transit authorities of autonomous vehicles to get people from their homes to the GO train stations or the subway stations or whatnot, and or I presume at the other end from the stations to their places. And Bern suggested scooters are one solution, obviously bikes, other types of rideshare, et cetera. I love the idea, Bern, of everyone getting off the train and getting on a scooter for 3 kilometers. It sounds like a fantastic way to get stimulated for a day of innovation. Our two guests are Bern Grush and Jerry Boyer. They're the co-founders of a Canadian company called Harmonize Mobility. Jerry, maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the projects you're involved in.
Sure, we're working on several interesting ones. I'll use a couple of examples. So out in Vancouver, there's the transit agency or the transit organization is TransLink. We're working with TransLink to find innovative ways to drive more riders to their train stations. So exactly the experience that you described, getting to the GO station here in Ontario, they have the same situation. They have train stations that are poorly served or not served at all by public transportation. And so they're looking at how they can use Ride Deal to develop that first last mile connection to their train station. We're also working with commercial real estate development companies that are looking at providing transportation from their development sites. So right now they're poorly served or not served at all. This is in Ontario. There's several real estate developments that just don't have any transportation solutions. And so they're looking at ways that they can offer and use Ride Deal to basically subsidize rides for their residents to get to the train station. Just a couple of quick examples.
Fantastic. And Bern, I understand you're doing work in Europe. Tell me about it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of interest in Europe. When 2 years ago, I first went there to teach a course. This was about autonomous vehicles. And I met the head is a group called AM2. And that is it's kind of like the Canadian Urban Transport Association, but for Catalonia. And there's almost, I don't know, I think 100 municipalities that are members of that group. And they see, just like you'd imagine the 99 municipalities in Ontario that have transit, to have a lot of those transit cities are with different sort of levels of budget and different levels of ridership and so forth. They were very interested in this then, and then COVID hit. And since COVID hit, the interest has gone up because many of cities everywhere around the world are saying we need to get people back to transit. We need to understand what we're going to do with our transit systems that are underused right now, especially underused. They're right around the world. That's the case. And many of those cities have been closing down some of their bus routes, but they still need to get people to where they need to get to, or they still need to get people to the larger train routes, for example. So several towns and cities are looking at that. Some of them are looking at it in terms of bike share. Some I mentioned earlier, looking at it in terms of scooter. We've been to the World Bank at a meeting there, at which it was remarked this would be an enormously valuable program for what's called late night issues. So in some countries, female transit users are under a special risk of violence late at night. And some women cannot take work for that danger. And so it would actually allow them, after the bus routes shut down, it would actually allow them to continue their employment or to accept employment where they otherwise couldn't. So there's all kinds of these issues that are being looked at by multiple elements in Europe.
I got to tell you, Bern, and I apologize for interrupting, but I think that the connectivity is one of the keys. My daughter used to feel fearful, not necessarily on a bus or even in the Uber, but it was the 5 or 10 minutes she had to wait at the station for the Uber to show up. So if the Uber was right there, she would feel okay.
Yep.
And or frankly, if I went to pick her up, she would be okay. But what she didn't want is she didn't feel comfortable in some of these more suburban train stations standing around for 5 or 10 minutes.
Yep. Don't blame her.
Yep.
Don't blame her at all.
So it wasn't the transit, but it was the connectivity between the two transits.
Yep. No, it's waiting at the stop or station, or sometimes in some countries it's on the bus itself. But you're right. In most places, it's just standing around, being exposed, looking idle. It creates messages that are unintended and that are very risky.
When you commented about the impact of COVID, revenue is down dramatically for most transit operators. Usage is down. I spoke with Joe Barrage, principal of urban strategies, and he said, we've got a real challenge in persuading people to come back to transit. What do you think we need to do?
Well, we need to find all sorts of ways to incentivize people to get back. So part of it is we need to deal with some of the fears, and an incentive doesn't take the fear away. So we have to be concerned about cleanliness. We have to be concerned about a degree of ongoing social distancing and so forth. One of the programs that we are looking at in Europe actually has that the subsidy is correlated with with how dense the ride is. In other words, the subsidy is designed to bias the rider toward a degree of social distancing for the comfort of the rider, for example. So that's pretty important. But all in all, we need to find a way to get people. So even when social distancing calms down, there's been people that have now started to rely on their cars, people that purchased cars that they otherwise weren't going to purchase, or kept the car they weren't going to keep. And so now their habit is shifted a little bit, somewhat, toward using a vehicle. And as we start to go back to work, and as we use more, I think congestion is going to go up higher than before. And now it comes to the issue is, how do we entice you to, use the train instead of driving into work? So it's go back to 2018 when you used to go down to the train station and say, oh, forget it, I'm just going to drive in. How can we prevent that from happening? Because we're going to go back toward that over the next year or so. And this is what Ride Deal is about. It's about enticing you or encouraging you to not do that, to actually use transit.
And it also gives the transit operator some new tools, right? So it's all about frequency and coverage for the transit operator, and it's a slippery slope if you're reducing frequency, for example. You have to wait an hour instead of 15 minutes for the bus, or you're reducing coverage. Those are both kind of, that's not going to bring more people to ride.
Sure is not.
So with Ride Deal, we can use those third-party services, keep the frequency up, and then expand coverage as well.
Jerry, I had the Vice President of Corporate Affairs for General Motors on my show, and he said, Brian, I've got to say, I'm not sure we should be investing as much money in transit going forward as we are, because with autonomous vehicles, and he started to tell me about how intent GM was in number one, electronic vehicles, and then number two, autonomous vehicles. He said, you're going to be able to effectively have a train on the Gardner Expressway and the Don Valley Parkway, because these autonomous vehicles are going to get on the road, and the amount of room between the cars is going to be limited. And they're going to, there's going to be no accidents. There's going to be no problems. There's going to be no slowing down. They're going to be able to dramatically increase the usage of every lane of the highway, because they're going to be just almost acting like a train, not connected, but almost connected. Do you believe that?
Ryan, in 1950s, I saw ads that said 9 out of 10 doctors recommend Camel cigarettes.
Yeah,
I'm old enough to remember that. So be careful of what you're being told.
So Brian, I believe it, but I don't believe I'm going to see it in my lifetime or any of our lifetimes. And I think it would be awesome, right? What he describes, that is a incredibly exciting future, but that's a long way away.
Bern, I interviewed the president of Drone Delivery Canada, and I actually quoted you and some of the comments you made in regards to how challenging it's going to be to have robots interact with people on sidewalks. And he said, look, we're going to have electronic operated unmanned drone taxis like the Jetsons flying us around. Is that going to happen?
Same problem. So we will have them moving we will be able to use aerial drones from warehouse to warehouse, even from warehouse to micro warehouse, but we're not going to use them to move it. We're not going to use them to drop off a package on your porch. We're going to either need like e-cargo bikes, or we're going to need the kind of sidewalk drones that I was describing earlier because of safety issues and noise issues. So you need to be very careful. You need to be very careful of anybody who's developing a product, because their product is wonderful. It's the policy and the geography and the operation and the deployment of those products that's the problem.
Yeah, 100-pound packages flying over your head. What could go wrong?
We're having a fascinating conversation tonight about autonomous vehicles and the last mile. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking about innovation tonight. We're talking autonomous vehicles, and we're talking about using autonomous vehicles for the solution of the last mile for transit. So we're not going to get rid of transit. We're not going to get rid of trains and subways, but we, I guess, may get rid of the meandering bus that goes to the suburbs. But what we're going to do is we're going to use autonomous vehicles to get people more efficiently to those transit nodes to get them downtown. Our guests are Bern Grush and Jerry Boyer. They're the co-founders of a Canadian company called Harmonize Mobility, and their focus is on solutions that connect new transportation technologies to public policy. Bern, what are some of the lessons learned that you've learned as you're going through this process?
Probably the main lesson I've learned in the last few years is that transit systems are very, very, very slow to change. And I know there's been quite a disruption because of COVID. Sadly, that's what it took to have them change. But that's one lesson. And the second lesson, really important lesson, there's an enormous gap between the business models that are in place for the transportation companies, that whether they're taxis or bikes or whatever, there's a business model of getting people to use those vehicles, and the policy models for public transit. Public transit is about policy, as you very well know, and listeners very well know, but all of these others are about business models. And there's a huge gap between the business models of getting you to use a taxi or an Uber. That's why you'll hear in New York City that Uber is a problem, because it's taking away transit users. But you'll hear wonderful things about Uber in Innisfil, for example, because the use of Uber in Innisfil is a policy use, but the use of Uber in New York City is a business use. What I mean by all of that, or what I'm learning from all of that, is that the gap is what's in the way of progress right now. And that's, again, the reasoning behind our work.
Jerry, what's the next stage? What are the next steps for both Rideal, as well as for autonomous vehicles and the last mile solution?
Yeah, so this is an ongoing and slow process for sure. So transit agencies are conservative in nature, and they can't do massive change really quickly. And so this is just an ongoing conversation. Right now there are hundreds of partnerships between transit agencies and private ride providers across North America. And they're just starting to understand the value that they can gain from that. And so the next step for us is, our product helps them do more of that and manage it much more effectively, use their funding, and provide better services. And so it's just a matter of kind of one step, one foot after the other, and keep the conversation going, and having conversations such as this today to get the word out that it doesn't have to be the way that it is today. We can actually make a huge difference.
Bern, if people are interested in your company and this organization, or if any municipalities want to avail themselves of your system, do you have a website they can go to?
Yes, there's a website, harmonizemobility.com. Is the website, and there's an email address, info@harmonizemobility.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us and telling us a little bit about this last mile solution using autonomous vehicles in concert with transit organizations to solve public policy issues. Rideal is the company, and Harmonize Mobility is the company. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's Bern Grush and Jerry Boyer, the co-founders of Harmonize Mobility, that have joined us tonight on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I come to you every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. You can get my podcasts and videocasts on briancrombie.com. Videos on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and podcasts on Apple Podcast, Audible, Speakeasy, etc. So Bern and Jerry, I'm trying to be innovative too, and get my message out as many ways as possible. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Brian.